Welcome to How the World Works. I'm Kevin Williamson, writer in residence here at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and this is a podcast where we talk about work and jobs that we've had and what they've meant in our lives other than just a paycheck and a place that we have to be 40 or 50 or 60 or however many hours a week. And one of the great points of podcasts here in Washington where we are right now is to curry favor with people. When there's people that you want to get in good with, you invite them to be on your podcast and you ask them a bunch of kind of softball questions. And there's no one more important in this neighborhood to curry favor with than our current guest. And this is Miranda Rinaldi, who owns Nino's Bakery, which is actually on the ground floor of our building here. She had to come all of about 80 feet and then up an elevator ride to our offices. We're glad to be here. And Miranda very famously makes croissants that you can't buy. Because she sells out of them so quickly every day. I'm sorry to say that I've not yet tried them. I'm looking forward to it, but I have to be careful with that sort of thing. If you watch this video series from when it began until now, you'll see why. And anyway, welcome to How the World Works.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You were a foreign service officer in Afghanistan once upon a time.
I was.
Were you there thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe I'll bake some croissants instead because Afghanistan is terrible and it's not a great posting. I'm sure it was interesting.
So I was in the Foreign Service for 9 years. I was in Europe, Central America, Afghanistan, and then Europe after that. I did a year in Afghanistan during the surge from 2011 to 2012. And it was fascinating. And it was difficult. And yes, I think that was the kind of turning point for my career. When I left, I did not immediately plan to get out of the service. I still was not super sure of where I wanted to go, but I was turning 30. And I got out of Afghanistan. I got divorced. And I moved to Italy. So I did what you should do in that situation, was I got a dog, which I recommend to everybody in that situation.
Tell us about Nino.
So I got Nino from a shelter outside Milan. He was about 7. He's a dachshund mix, and
For the record, dachshunds are the best dogs.
Oh, obviously, right? So you could pretty much do anything, and he was just very loving, calm, easy to deal with. He did chew lots of internet cables, which the internet company was not really believing me when I told them the dog had again done this, but he loved to chew furniture.
You're better off without the internet.
Right.
Did he already have the name Nino when you got him, or did you name him after Antonin Scalia?
No. No, he was already named Nino.
Okay.
But yeah, so I had a lot of free time. So Nino and I, on the weekends, would go walking around Milan. And in Italy, you can basically take your dog anywhere. So he would go in restaurants and lots of bakeries. And so that was kind of part of the time where I was thinking, okay, you're 30, you've just gotten divorced, you have been in the service for, I think, about 6 or 7 years then. You need to kind of think, is this what I want to do forever? And people always tell you in the government, like, oh, once you hit 10 years, you're vested and you have to stay in and you have to, don't waste that time. And I loved the Foreign Service. I mean, it's a fascinating job. You are doing meaningful work.
What did you do?
So I mostly did consular work. In Afghanistan, I did press work. Consular work is visas, so whether or not someone can enter the United States, but it's also assisting American citizens overseas. So a lot of that work can be confrontational. Some people get very upset when you tell them they can't go to the United States. So that's kind of draining to do all the time. And also, a lot of times you're talking to Americans overseas and it's a great moment, like they had a baby and you're registering the baby, or George Clooney got married. We, registered his paperwork for his wedding in Venice. so there are these moments of joy, but then there's also this confrontation. So other Americans, you are...
Guy's got a house in Como and he got married in Venice?
Yes.
We'll have to come back to that later, but all right.
Yeah. So other Americans, you're there at like the worst point of their life. Someone has died, they're incarcerated, a crime has been committed. So it was...
Sometimes I imagine all three of those things have happened at once.
Yes. And all three of those different subjects are American.
Yeah.
So it can be emotional. And so about 6 months after I had been in Italy, one of my, the replacements for the team at the press office in Kabul, she was killed. And that was just a very jarring, emotional experience for all of us. And I think it made me think, okay, she was 25. She's never going to do all these things that we all hope to do. She's never going to have all these experiences in her personal life. So
How did she die? Was it a bombing or
yeah.
Okay.
So you should, we all did this job and somehow you were okay and she was not. And so you need to, not just go through the motions. You need to find what you really care about. And so I started to really think about different things, and that's when I started doing pastry classes on the weekends. So I would go to work on the weekdays, and then on the weekends I would go to pastry school, which, Milan is kind of a great place to go to pastry school.
Yeah. I was just thinking most of these sort of eat, pray, love stories don't begin in Afghanistan, but yours is maybe a little more interesting than the fictional versions of that. And was the Foreign Service your first job out of school anyway?
I did a year at the Federal Trade Commission, and then I went to the Foreign Service.
And where were you in school before that?
At Yale.
At Yale. What'd you study?
Economics.
Did you like it?
I did. I loved it there.
So, Yale, government work, life crisis,
Yes.
croissants.
Yes.
Okay. So walk me through Milan to the opening of your place
succinct.
here.
Yeah, so, you're in this beautiful place. You have this very prestigious job, which is, fulfilling and worthwhile. And, I can't say enough good things about that. But personally, I was not happy. And so I looked around and I thought, okay, there are a lot of people here who seem to be content with their lives. But for women, it's very difficult to find someone that wants to go to random countries with you every 2 years. It's just a very challenging prospect to lay out there.
It may not be that difficult to find someone who wants to go with you to random countries every 2 years. It would probably be difficult to find someone you want to marry.
Yeah.
Who is willing to go to you with a random country every 2 years.
And I had tried that before, and I thought I should not try this again. So for me, I thought, okay, if you want that, you need to go back to the United States. So, there's lots of people that works out for in the Foreign Service and the military. But for me, that just was not something I thought was likely to occur and I wanted. So I came back to the United States. I spent another almost a year at the State Department here in D.C., and then I went to pastry school in Chicago.
Did you get some grief for that? People saying, Yale was very expensive, and somebody paid for that, presumably somewhere. And they're saying, and now you're taking pastry classes. Maybe we could have skipped Yale and gone straight to the pastry classes, or?
Yeah, so my grandmother, when I got into Yale, in front of everyone at Easter dinner, said, why would you pay for her to do that? She's just going to get married and have children. And I thought, wow, okay. But my family was very, very supportive. There were a lot of people who had served in the military, and so they were very supportive of, not military service, but my civil service for the United States. Yeah. So I felt that, I had done important work for the U.S., and that was okay. And my parents were obviously also, they had paid for that. They were very supportive. It's a totally different way to go. Obviously, most Yaleys, like, you're doing super prestigious jobs.
Well, this sort of hits on one of our themes here that we have. I think as a society, really kind of goofy and weird attitudes about work and prestige that goes with jobs. So, and it's not connected to earning exactly. There are people out there who are construction managers who make a lot more money than people who have Ivy League degrees and work for the government in some prestigious role or another. But we have these kind of funny ideas about what counts as a kind of prestigious or good or respectable kind of job, and so I think that it probably must have been in some ways difficult to make that transition because you got so much invested in having got this particular education, done these kind of jobs, and then you're looking to do something else, and there is a whole art and science and tradition of being an entrepreneur and starting your own business. And it's not an easy thing to do. And it's in many ways much more difficult, I think, and potentially much more rewarding, or at least certainly more lucrative than a government job. But the nice thing about a government job is like there's that track, like you do this, then you do that, then you do this, then you do that. And like wherever you are working for the government, whether you're in the military or in civil service or something else, you know what the next step is pretty much. Unless you're at a very, very high level where you might be jumping around from agency to agency or something like that. Whereas now you're in Chicago, you're studying pastries where?
So I went to the French pastry school.
Mm-hmm.
They've since closed since the pandemic.
That's too bad.
But they had been open for, I think, since like 2009, something like that. And so I did it was a 6-month program. You go every day for 6 hours, and they are hands-on, teaching you all these different categories of pastry. And it's really a great experience because you can learn, people have all these online courses and you can learn from that. But having someone, physically watching you and seeing what you're doing wrong and, showing you how it should be done and what it should taste like.
Well, it's a physical thing.
Yeah, you really just cannot replicate that without having someone there with you.
Is there a particular reason you chose that school?
I think, there's several different places in the U.S. that are, I would say, very, very serious about culinary education. That was one that I'm from the Midwest. I love Chicago. It's a great place. And I think that it was a program that just kind of fit with what I was looking for at that time. But
Where in the Midwest do you come from?
Oh, so I come from the northeastern part of Ohio, kind of used to be steel mill area, Rust Belt. So that was close to where I could still visit my family and stuff. But Chicago is like the big place
nearest big city, yeah.
Yeah, for that. But yeah, no, they were great. You met all these different chefs, and you kind of see like what people do. Lots of people have different types of careers, like for big food companies. Some people open their own businesses. Other people work for like huge hotels or cruise lines. There's lots of different options. But it's very much something that gives you that idea of what could you do with this. So they were extremely helpful.
And did you go into the culinary education with an idea about what your business would look like afterward? Or did you just say, I'm interested in this and I'll find something to do with it?
Yeah.
I'll figure it out when I'm there.
I mean, I knew I wanted to open my own place.
Mm-hmm.
The Foreign Service is very much a hierarchical structure where you take commands and you do them. And I wanted to kind of do my own thing and be in charge. And if something went wrong, I would apologize for something that I had done, not for a decision that someone else had made. So I knew at that point in my life I wanted to do my own thing, but I was not totally sure of exactly, how everything would play out.
Is there a history of starting businesses in your family? Did you know people who'd started businesses before?
Yeah, my parents had a small business. It was kind of related to the car industry that is still partially there in Northeast Ohio. So I had that experience of kind of watching them, like, knowing how many hours would go into that, how things can go up and down. I was aware of this is not your government job where you get a steady paycheck. This is everything depends on you.
Lumpy incomes.
Yeah.
I associate baking for some reason, and maybe it's, time to make the donuts propaganda from the 1970s when I was growing up, with early hours. What does your workday look like?
So it depends on what you make, but I make croissants, which is a breakfast pastry.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we specialize in. And so, yes, I get up at 4 and I come in and it used to be that you had to get up earlier, but there has been technological innovation. And your proofers are on timers.
I don't know what a proofer is. Neither does anyone else, so you got to tell us.
All right. So the croissants have yeast, and the yeast is alive. And you have to control the temperature, the humidity, and the timing of how that yeast reacts so that it's ready at the time that you want to put it in the oven.
Gotcha.
Because all of you guys want everything right at 8, right before you go to work.
Of course.
And you all want it at the same time. So to organize all of that with the differing temperatures, humidity of the seasons and all these things, you have a proofer, which is like this case that controls the humidity, the temperature.
So you're micromanaging the environment.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is what enables you to not get up at midnight.
Midnight.
Yes.
Okay. So how long does the process take of proofing your
So the proofing
croissants?
is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Then they go in the oven, and then they come out and they have to cool down. So that part of it is probably about 3 to 4 hours. The process to make the dough, because it's a layered laminated dough, means that there are layers of butter inside the dough. To do all of that, that's a process that takes us 2 days prior to that baking.
So walk me through how that actually works. You're building like great big sheets of these
Yes.
layers, and then you chop them up into, tell me about it. I don't know how it works. I
so
know
you
nothing
have,
about this stuff.
So you have what's called a sheeter.
I'm on the consumer end of croissants only.
So you have what's called a sheeter, which is basically like a lathe. And so you have a big mixer, you're mixing in all the dough, and then you take it over to the sheeter, you're thinning out the layer, you're folding in, squares of butter, and then you're constantly, laying it, putting it through the sheeter to a certain millimeter, and then folding it over itself, letting it rest so the dough doesn't get upset, and then doing that over again. So you're doing that for a series of times, and you're controlling the temperature and kind of the consistency, the elasticity of the dough.
Is this a recipe you developed yourself?
No, this is just directly the standard one that I learned in pastry school.
So why do you think yours are so popular?
So the problem with the type of work that we do is scaling. So if you want to truly scale up, most people use pre-made sheets.
I see.
So they're buying these already laminated sheets and then just rolling it out once and cutting it. That's fine, and lots of people do that. But that wasn't what I wanted. And so we spend all this time doing it from scratch because we believe it's better.
So you're just truly starting with bags of flour and
Yes.
tubs of butter and or bricks of butter, I assume, not tubs
I
of
do
butter.
not have to go to the gym because I lift 50-pound bags of flour.
Well, for someone who bakes croissants all day, you're quite
Because
slim.
you never
so, yeah.
sit down.
Yeah. So it's flour, it's butter. You said, I was asking you earlier off camera before we started about getting butter, and you were saying you imported it. And I was wondering, is tariffs something on your radar? Are you worried about changes in butter prices or ability to
Yeah.
supply yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think when all this started, it just brought you back to COVID. And you think, are we going to have shortages like we did in COVID? Are we going to have wild price changes like we did in COVID? And I mean, no one knows. Maybe we will, maybe we won't.
Come on, you're an econ major. You're supposed to be able to answer this question for us.
Well,
Come
who
on.
knows what decisions will be made.
Yeah, it's more of a psychology issue than an economics issue.
But yeah, so we import what we buy through suppliers, imported butter, imported chocolate. For an example, something that is not related to the current administration. Last year, the EU put on a different rule for chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we want all the suppliers that bring chocolate into the EU to show us map out where they're harvesting. So they're trying to control, are you deforesting? Are you, claiming that this was made somewhere else and using substandard, either labor standards or something else? And so in order to do that, these farmers in Ghana and wherever else have to invest in having someone come out and actually say, this is where my land is, this is where I'm growing the cocoa. And so that process alone shot up the chocolate prices.
Yeah.
So we used to make a particular passion fruit croissant, which is made from white chocolate that is infused, the passion fruit is infused into it, from Valrhona. And we just can't do that anymore because the price went so high.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, hopefully they'll go through this process and the price will come back down and that will adjust. But that's something where, yes, we are definitely affected by changes in legal or...
Yeah, I won't put you on the spot too much about the politics of it, but we are pointy-headed libertarians around here, and so that's kind of our thing. When people talk about these regulatory changes, and in the United States, particularly among kind of urban progressive types, there's a great deal of admiration for the more European model of business regulation, which I think there's a lot. There are good things to be said for. I'm not a super anti-Europe guy when it comes to these things, but when people talk about regulations, they think of Acme Croissant Company with its 10,000 employees and its regulatory staff of 60 lawyers who all went to Harvard Law School, no offense to Yale. And they're not thinking, we've got farmers in Ghana on one side who are maybe not super well equipped to deal with these extra regulatory burdens. And what we think of as being relatively small marginal costs might be their income for a year or 5. And on the other end of the equation, we've got a relatively small business here in the States. You are not some huge operation that has Google's money for a compliance office. Has the experience changed how you think about regulation, or has it maybe sort of deepened your understanding of how it works with other sorts of businesses, or was it something that was on your radar as an issue before?
I think that, for example, with the European chocolate regulation, they announced that way ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
People were aware it was going to happen, and
helpful.
That allows you to think, okay, this might be a problem. I need to adjust. What is my plan to do that? I think that is something that we would all appreciate right now. Even a small business like mine, if I buy coffee cups, coffee lids, those just are not made in the United States. They're not. And I think for someone to set that up here, maybe if there was time and foreknowledge, those kind of things might start to happen. But when it's abrupt like that, they don't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I've often said that I don't like high taxes, but I would much rather fight about, instead of whether the top tax rate is going to be 39% or 37%, just pick one and stick with it for 25 years. And that's much more true when it comes to regulatory issues than it is to tax issues, because tax, you expect your tax bill to change from year to year because your income changes from year to year. But what you can do as a business, where you can get stuff, what kind of suppliers you can make deals with, I imagine a lot of these things are pretty long-term commitments for you. You can't just you can't run down to Walmart and pick up a month's worth of supplies of the stuff that you need. And if you're getting stuff shipped in, perishable stuff across oceans and things, which is much easier to do now than it was 25 years ago, but it's still, there are real challenges involved in that. So certainty then would be helpful, you think?
Yes.
Don't mean to put words in your mouth. Well, I'm just glad you brought that up. That's one of those nice little points that I don't try to push people into, but it's nice when they come up organically. For my evil propagandistic purposes here. You thought we came in to talk about pastries, and we're talking about other stuff. What was it like starting the business? Where'd you get the startup capital, and what were your like original expenses and stuff like? Was it financially, personally, just terrifying to do, or
I think it should have been. I should have had that reaction, but
businesses?
I did not.
Businesses are always started successfully by people who should have known better.
So, as you may have seen from my other choices, I'm not exactly risk averse. So I kind of jumped in, and I had personal savings. Obviously, when you're in Afghanistan, you're not like buying things and going to nice dinners during that year.
Not a lot of bar bills.
No, so you save a lot of money. So I had savings from my previous job, and then I took out loans.
Mm-hmm.
And
what were those meetings like?
it's very much when you have something that's totally new, no one really wants to take a chance on you.
Of course.
And you have to really push, this is why this is going to work, or this is why I have a shot at getting this to work. And I think I was really lucky because my prior experience helped.
Mm-hmm.
Telling people, I went through all these different, places, and I have a plan, and also, you just have to bring them pastries.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
You
But do you think the fact your educational and work background make you seem like a serious person?
Yes.
To them maybe in a way that
Yes.
some people starting bakeries don't, at least on paper,
I
look
think-
that way to a banker who doesn't know much.
They need something to anchor to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you bring pastries to your loan meetings?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I brought pastries here. I mean, you have to, if you have a food business, you have to bring food, like pretty much everywhere you go.
Kind of a rule, I suppose. Yeah.
If you don't show up with food, people are upset. But yeah, I think, if someone is taking that risk and giving you money, even though it's a loan, they need to anchor to something. And so my prior experiences, I think, were the only real thing that I could show them to anchor to.
Yeah. One of the things I love about your story, something I guess I would describe as a boss move in both senses of the word, in that it's a great thing to do, but also the only thing you get to do when you're a boss, is you were saying that part of this decision was made by a desire to come back to the States and be able to start a family and that stuff. And you had a kid, and you said, I'm giving myself parental leave, and I'm closing my business from, was it April through August?
Yes.
That's a long time to close a small business that people come to every morning.
Yeah. Some people were very upset.
What did your hate mail look like?
Some people wrote on Reddit that we must be a mafia front because how could we afford the rent? And, I am an Italian American, but it's not 1965. So that was kind of hilarious. But
You're also from the wrong part of Ohio.
yeah. So I would say that, like the other choices, this was something I had planned for years. And so I saved up. I still have to pay my commercial rent.
Mm-hmm.
You still have all these expenses that you have to cover. You are not, working for a private company and receiving your same salary while you're on parental leave. But it's not realistic for a lot of people. So I understand why people would question that. But it was something that we wanted and we planned for, and lucky enough to have had that work out. Honestly, though, most people, it was like a blip. I mean, you could close for renovations and no one says a thing, and no one really cares.
Do you think it was publicly stating the reason for your closure that pushed on people's buttons?
I think it's obviously it's a controversial topic. Everyone is kind of unsure how to deal with, but most people were great. Most people, they can relate. And
Why should it be a controversial topic? You just had a kid. You want to take some time off? It's your damn business.
I mean, like if you look at Europe has extensive parental
Sure, of
leave,
course,
and
yeah.
in the U.S. we don't. Some people have parental leave, some people don't. And so, yeah, honestly, I don't think in the end it really affected us. We were gone for those 6 months, and then we came back, and it was fine. So you just never know.
Yeah. Decision you're happy with in retrospect? Was it a good 6 months for you?
Definitely. I had a C-section, so I was not going to be able to lift those 50 pounds of flour after that. I needed that time.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. And also, you get to have this time with your child, which is, really spectacular.
I have 18-month-old triplets at home, actually.
Oh, my God.
And I don't think my wife was probably lifting any 50-pound bags of anything for a while
Yeah.
after that delivery. Although she's pretty dedicated when it comes to that sort of thing. She likes to lift things and exercise and whatnot. Tell me what the vector was like when you start your business. So you've got the idea, you rent this, and I imagine, is rent like your biggest expense? It's got to be super expensive in this neighborhood.
So
There's a payroll.
your rent is definitely a large chunk. Payroll is also a large chunk.
Butter.
Lots of butter. So, like I said, when I first started out, I was not, there's so many things you don't know and you wish that you would have changed or you would have done differently. When I first started, I just made everything that I want to eat.
Yeah.
Which is not what you should do.
Probably not, no.
So, I kind of went through a period of trial and error where you see what really sells, what do people really want. And my husband, who is an MBA, has constantly told me, you have to figure out, what are you selling? Because in the end, you're not really selling pastries. You're selling this feeling. Like, if you are in your office and you just need a pick-me-up, you should come to us because you're going to, ideally, you're going to come in and get something where you think, wow. And it resets your mind because it should not be something that you just pick up, something that looks like it's been there for, 5 years.
Only people with MBAs think that bakeries don't sell pastries. They think you're selling something else. I'm sure your husband's a great guy, but it sort of thing makes you kind of want to throttle people when they sometimes overcomplicate things. But what I really wanted to hear about was tell me about your sort of first day of business. Walk me through your the first day with the doors open, or actually maybe the 10 days before you open, and then the first day.
So the 10 days before your opening, you are going through the health department's certification where they come in and they check everything to make sure that you are compliant with all the regulations. That's fine, but it is very nerve-wracking, and there's always some last-minute thing that you have to fix.
What was your last-minute thing?
Our dishwasher, we had to reset and have someone come in and reset it so it hit a specific temperature.
Gotcha.
So there's all of that, and then just getting the flow of how employees interact with each other, how they deal with customers, the organization of everything.
How many employees did you have when you opened?
We only had 2 at that time. But it really, it takes a while to get used to things, and I think you have to just go through that experience when you're something small. If you're a larger company and you've done this, how many times, and someone can go to another branch and be trained, that's one thing. But when you're starting it from scratch, you just really have to go with it as it comes and train people and figure out what the bottlenecks are and what the mistakes are. So you make those mistakes.
Yeah, a lot of that, sort of scheduling procedures and what order do we do things and who does what ends up sort of just necessarily developing organically, I assume.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a painful process to get through sometimes. What day of the week did you open on? Did you open on a Monday morning?
Oh, my God.
Do you remember?
I think we did.
And what was in your register at the end of the day?
Oh, my God. We, I can't remember exactly, but it was very low. We did a small soft opening, and then we opened it. It was January, which is always the slowest month for food businesses.
Why?
So you've had the holidays, you've spent a lot of money, you've eaten a lot of stuff.
Gotcha.
You're, thinking about maybe I shouldn't be eating that.
Everyone's feeling fat and broke.
Yeah. So January is not your great month usually. But it is a good time to kind of ramp up. So it was a good time to kind of ease into everything. Yeah. So we went through this different kind of testing out what do people really want, and it just came back to croissants.
Mm-hmm.
So we do all these varieties of croissants now because that is really what's sold, and really kind of, I think you need to be known for a particular thing so that people know what to expect. And now that's what we're known for.
So the old, famous Amos example, and they always teach us in business school where you don't have to make Ferraris or Rolls Royces. You just have to make the best version of something. Mm-hmm. And the idea, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, talking to a professional baker here, you're not going to believe that famous Amos is the best cookie. You can buy maybe the best mass-produced, prepackaged convenience store cookie.
It's what you're looking for at the time, right?
And that's the idea, is just to distinguish yourself from the market that way. A couple of other businesses that I've written about over the years where people, you take a product that you wouldn't necessarily think all that much about, or maybe the average person wouldn't think about all that much. Like I wrote a big thing a couple of years ago about a guy who makes kitchen knives, and just started making them, kind of from scratch one day, and ended up having a very, very successful business doing that. Or I guess in New York, there's a couple of restaurants that just make grilled cheese sandwiches.
I've heard of this.
And what is it called? It's got a funny name, I can't remember, but it's an awfully good grilled cheese sandwich. Then, if you're in the mood for it, that's kind of what it is. So, but you didn't know it was going to be croissants when you opened the door. You thought it might be something else.
No, we were doing all kinds of things. We were doing tarts and cakes and all these different cookies. Some very, very Italian things, which, some we still do, but a lot of them we had to switch out. Tastes are different in every place, and people are used to different things.
Do you worry about dietary trends and?
No. We.
No one's going to cut enough carbs.
We
just
to hurt
cannot
your accommodate if you're vegan. We have a very small bakery. We can't.
Oh, sure. I meant just more in terms of long-term healthier business. If people decide, we're going to eat less sugar, everyone starts taking Ozempic, and suddenly you're bankrupt.
I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
Our whole theory is, if you can only have a small amount of this, you should have the best of that, and that's what we try to do. So if you can only have one thing a day or one thing a week, it should be really amazing, and you should think that was worth it.
Yeah. So what did your ramp up look like? You open up the first day, kind of a soft opening. You don't make very much money. At some point later, there's a line out your door every day, and it's obviously very successful. What happens between those 2 points?
Well, there was COVID. So we opened in 2018. We were kind of very much the first year figuring things out, testing out different strategies. In 2019, we were it was ramping up. And then 2020 happened, and we fully shut down for, I think, about 2 months. And then we opened with just the front doors open and our case pushed up to the front door. And there were 2 of us, and that's how we did it. We had to do a small amount of the food delivery services just because people weren't coming downtown. Mm-hmm.
Do you like those?
Those are terrible.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was going to ask.
So we only did that during that time. It's very hard to give that much of your margin to another company.
Yeah.
And plus, it's just very hard for people to pay that huge amount on a small item.
They also don't do a good job.
There's lots of errors. There's, parking issues, all of that. It's just very complicated for giving up a margin.
Yeah, there are a couple of, it's a little pet peeve of mine where I'm a very pro-technology, kind of pro-investment and development. And I'm not quite a techno-utopian, but I very, very strongly believe that that's where, real improvements in material standards of life come from. But every now and then you find something where technology has made an industry just measurably and obviously worse. And taxi drivers are an example of this, where you've got, you go to London and they have what's known as the knowledge with the capital K, and everyone who drives a taxi in London has to know every address in the city and be able to find it essentially, blindfolded, driving one-handed while having a conversation about, London taxi drivers, how much he hates Muslims and immigrants. And talk to a London taxi driver. They're a special breed. Whereas you go to New York City and you've got a situation where you've got a market that really, really developed after GPS and drive-by turn direction. So the cabs are all driven mostly by people who are immigrants, who are often very, very new immigrants who don't know the city. And I'm glad they're here, glad they're working. But I lived in New York for a long time, and I would tell people, take me to City Hall, and they would look at you like, what are you talking about? City Hall here in New York, in the city where you work. And that's a pure, technology warp in the market in a way that's not helpful. And I think food deliveries may be an aspect of that too, where most of those services just do not do a very good job. Although better, I think, the bigger the city you are. I think there's maybe a density issue there. I live in a very small town in a kind of semi-rural area. And so I know my 2 Lyft drivers and my 1 delivery guy. And it's not an ideal situation. You were talking about technological improvements in your business earlier. In the proofer was one thing. Are there others that have been important to making better pastries? Is there a sort of purist mentality somewhere? There's some guy in Paris saying,
there is
you should not use this.
Yeah, there is a bakery in France that does not use any modern machinery. They do everything by hand.
And they get up at midnight.
And I don't know how they do that. I don't imagine how much they produce that way. There's a spectrum. You could go fully factory style, which, you can get those croissants at Costco. But we're at the point where we believe, yes, we use part of that, but our focus is still on small batch, high quality. Our hands are definitely in the dough. So there's a lot of innovation in equipment, which is fantastic, and it definitely saves you a lot of time. But there is a limit, I would say, with the kind of work that we do where you basically hit a point where if you had more machinery, it just wouldn't be artisan. It wouldn't be that creative way. So, for example, I can't tell you my menu this week because sometimes I just make whatever type of croissant I want.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have more of this left over or that left over. And so we think, well, what could we do with that? And that's what we make. I think you can't do that kind of creativity if you are really at too focused on the machinery and the schedule. So we're small. We're obviously not super scalable, and I like that, because it lets me do whatever I want to do.
So part of me is thinking that you've got an economics background. You're married to an MBA. At some level, you must know back of your head somewhere that your margin on a plain croissant's better than your margin on a chocolate croissant. Is this dinner time conversation at your home? Or?
Yes, there's a lot of. A lot of conversation about that and how things could be improved or streamlined. But
which is in tension sometimes with the artisan inclination, I think.
Yeah, whatever business you have to, the math has to work, right? You have to not be so focused every day on how am I going to pay this bill that you really can't function. So, going beyond that, then yes, once you're kind of at a certain point where you feel pretty stable, I feel like you would lose so much creativity and so much options of why you want to keep doing it. Because part of the reason that I'm still interested is because I try something different all the time. I mean, we'll see something and I'll think, well, how would I do that? And if you're so focused on margins, you really can't try those things out.
Yeah. Do you hear from private equity guys who say, hey, we can take this and make it a chain and we want to, well, you will at some point. You're in the newspapers, people read about you, it's a well-known business. Some guy out there is thinking, probably some guy you went to school with at Yale in the economics department is thinking, hey, what we can do is we can make 500 of these all over the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that's just really not the vibe that we're going for. And that's just not something that I'm interested in.
Yeah. How do you like working in D.C. as a business that faces customers? Because D.C., I find, is a city that is full of people who do not lack for a sense of self-importance or the value of their time. Oh. And maybe can be difficult customers from time to time, I would imagine.
I would say it's kind of self-sorting. So if you are that type of customer, you probably don't want to come to us.
No?
because you might see a line. You don't want to wait in that line.
That's true.
You,
But it is a status symbol croissant.
Yeah, but it's like if you most of our customers are, they're pretty easygoing. Every once in a while we have difficult people, but most of them are great. And it is DC, so people are interesting. Part of the reason I think we survived the pandemic is because, I have great staff. They know the regulars. We chat with them. There's a retired guy that lives across the street. He's come in almost every day since I opened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you really build these relationships in the neighborhood that you wouldn't think in downtown in a center of a city, but we do. I mean, people live, downtown here, and so I think that's part of why we made it through the pandemic.
You mentioned COVID messing with your business a little bit there at the beginning. Has changes in office culture and work from home, has that really affected? Because people, breakfast and lunch is about where you work, not where you live.
Yeah. So we have drastically changed our schedules. We used to be open all day, 8 to 5 when we first started. And then during COVID, we were only open a few hours in the morning, and then we gradually increased that. There was a period where people would only go to work 2 days a week. So it was like Tuesday, Thursday. Everyone would come to work. Then I didn't get the memo, and everyone changed that to Wednesdays. It was all over the place. Now it's starting to kind of even out, but not to be political, but a lot of there's a lot of government agencies around us, and so some of those offices that have either closed or reduced staff, we've felt that and noticed that.
Gotcha. What's your favorite thing on your menu currently?
Let's see. We also do cream puffs, and that is my favorite.
What exactly is a cream puff? I'm used to it as a rhetorical device,
Yeah. It's basically a shell, and then inside the shell you pipe in pastry cream or different flavors. So it's very simple, but it's, that's my favorite.
And do you have thoughts about business going forward? Are you kind of happy just running this thing where you are and keeping it this way and trying to grow at your current location? Or do you...
I mean, I think we're always thinking about, well, what could you do if you had maybe a slightly bigger kitchen? What could you do if, what is the next step? And like I said, we're not I do not want to become a chain. I don't want to have multiple locations. Because we want to really keep the personal, artisanal touch to it. But yes, we're always kind of thinking, what should you do next?
Right. Well, I think we could probably continue this for another half hour. I think it's a really interesting business, but we're getting at the end of our time. So thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you.
And that concludes our most recent episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and I suspect it may have left you a little bit hungry. If you would like to watch the video of this interview, there'll be a link in the show notes to YouTube. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next month.